Awesome. Hello, hello. Hope everyone is doing well. Interesting topic of conversation. Of course, we love our defamation lawsuits. Even more than that, we love defamation lawsuits that involve celebrities and news channels because it makes for amazing educational opportunities for us and also makes for interesting commentary. And of course, when you're not involved in litigation and you can sit at the sidelines and make comments about it, that's even better. So today we wanted to talk about very briefly two lawsuits involving a very high-profile lawyer who himself is the plaintiff. That's Alan Dershowitz, right? And so Alan Dershowitz, Harvard law professor, renowned attorney, constitutional scholar. I think regardless of the politics of things, anyone and everyone would think that Alan Dershowitz is in fact a constitutional scholar. So Alan, he was the one who defended former President Trump in his Senate impeachment trial. He's also defended O.J. Simpson. He also helped negotiate the plea bargain with Jeffrey Epstein. So I'll say no less. I'll say no more, I should say. So anyway, he is a very, very well-known attorney, and he is considered by all definitions a scholar. And I think the interesting thing is now he is the plaintiff in a spree of defamation lawsuits. There are two defamation lawsuits, both in federal court in Florida. And the crux of these lawsuits, they're totally different, but they're both defamation lawsuits. And the first one was filed against CNN, and we'll talk about both of these. But the first lawsuit was filed against CNN. The second one was filed against Netflix. The one against CNN was recently just, there was a motion to dismiss the lawsuit filed by CNN in order to get the lawsuit dismissed. And we'll talk about why this particular opinion is extremely important and extremely valuable for people that kind of have their finger on the pulse of defamation and particularly liability for news agencies. There were three defenses that provide a typical defense, but which failed at this stage in the litigation. And those three defenses are the fair reporting privilege, the opinion privilege, which is an absolute privilege, and the lack of malice defense whenever you sue a public figure. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about Dershowitz's litigation against Netflix, where essentially he alleges that Netflix had a contract with Dershowitz not to present him in a false or defamatory light, which I didn't know about. And also that, in fact, they not only breached the contract, but they did defame him by essentially portraying him as somebody that had, that committed sex assault against one of Epstein's victims. And so, the show that Netflix, the series, it's called Filthy Rich, I believe. And essentially it's about Epstein and his victims. And so I watched it. It's actually a fantastic documentary about this crooked man, Epstein, and, how Dershowitz is implicated in that Netflix special. And so I could see why he would be upset given that his, position is this is 100% false and defamatory. So anyway, let's talk about the ruling that came out of district court in Florida. I thought the judge did an amazing job just completely chopping down CNN's defense. Why this lawsuit is extremely important, and this order particularly, is because normally people think when you sue a news agency like CNN that it's very, very difficult to win, which it is. And that just because they're reporting on something, that it gives them sort of this absolute right to say and do anything. And that is just not the case. And there are sort of limitations in what can be said in a statement that alleges to be portraying a accurate news story on a topic. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're also going to talk about this malice standard. Like, what is the standard that you have to meet when you sue a news agency? It is a higher standard, particularly if you are a public figure, which is also discussed in this order. So I'm really looking forward to talking about this with you guys. Like most of our coffee and conversations, this will be recorded and we will post it. And you can feel free to send us your questions if you're watching this live. If you're watching this after the fact, you can certainly send us your comments through a DM or questions through a DM or comment on the video. So let's kind of jump into this. So the lawsuit against CNN. So basically, Dershowitz has filed, last year he filed a lawsuit against CNN over statements that CNN broadcasters made about Dershowitz's statements during the Senate impeachment trial of Donald Trump. What were those statements? Well, in a nutshell, basically, Dershowitz was answering some questions that were presented to him, specifically questions that Senator Ted Cruz had asked Alan Dershowitz. And I'm not going to read the entirety of this. It's on YouTube. You can watch this trial. You can listen to the commentary. You can read about it. But I do want to hit the salient points, right? So basically, Ted Cruz asked, what actions, what's the extent to which a president could go in seeking to be reelected? And this is how Dershowitz answers this, right? He says, the only thing that would make a quid pro quo unlawful. So Senator Cruz asks, would a quid pro quo be unlawful, if Donald Trump's trying to be reelected and there's a quid pro quo involved? And he says this: the only thing that would make a quid pro quo unlawful is if the quo were somehow illegal. Now we talk about motive. There are three possible motives that a political figure could have, and he goes through, his statements about what that means. That statement was taken. CNN at some point broadcasted, the entirety of the statement. But then in isolation, they basically took one of Dershowitz's statements and turned it into a open ticket. They basically said, hey, this famous constitutional scholar and commentator and defense attorney for Donald Trump is basically saying, this is in CNN's words, that if a president is running for re-election because he thinks that re-election will help America, he can do anything. And that's a direct quote. Another quote, that the Dershowitz doctrine would make presidents immune from every criminal act so long as they could plausibly claim that they did it to boost their re-election effort. Campaign finance laws out the window. Bribery statutes gone. Extortion no more. This is Donald Trump's fondest figurative dream, to be able to shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. That statement that I just read is a direct quote by Paul Begala on CNN on January 29, 2020. So, absolutely, Alan Dershowitz's statements during this impeachment trial were taken out of context. I've read the statements in full. Alan Dershowitz specifically says that if the quid pro quo, if the quo is illegal, then there can't be an open ticket to do a quid pro quo to get reelected. That's what this whole thing is about. And he has several paragraphs in text form. Of course, this is a narrative. But in text form, he makes it very, very clear that you can't have a personal pecuniary interest in getting reelected, and that you can't mix personal funds. You can't commit criminal acts with campaign finance laws. And certainly if, again, the quo in a quid pro quo is illegal, then you can't commit a quid pro quo when you're seeking to be reelected. That statement was taken and it was completely rearranged during the rebroadcast and commentary. So Alan Dershowitz is made to look like an idiot. He's basically made to look like somebody who's essentially saying that a president can do whatever they want, even if it's illegal, when they are trying to be reelected, when he said the exact opposite of that. Now, let me just make a quick comment here. I am not a big fan of major broadcast journalism. I am not a big fan of major broadcast news. I don't think it's news. I think it's entertainment. I think it's politically driven. And so the problem is most people watch the news. They get their current events and their updates, and they form opinions on people based on what the news is saying. Notwithstanding, I think CNN had an obligation to report what Dershowitz said fairly and accurately. And that goes to the heart of Dershowitz's claim. So Dershowitz is claiming $300 million in damages to his reputation because CNN is stating, as I just read, that Dershowitz's opinion, that his position in defending Donald Trump was that a president can do whatever they want, even if the acts are criminal, if they're seeking re-election and they think that it's in the best interest. That is not what Dershowitz said at all. It's clearly not. I've read the narrative of what he said. So he files suit. So this lawsuit is at what we call the pleading stage. It is at the initial complaint stage. And CNN files a motion to dismiss, something that most defense lawyers in a defamation lawsuit seek to do. They try to find either an anti-SLAPP, some sort of privilege defense, or an opinion defense, or otherwise tuck the statements under the First Amendment. The fair reporting privilege, let's talk about what that is. That's the first defense that CNN makes. It's actually a very good defense to make anytime a news outlet or independent blogger is sued. The fair report privilege is exactly what it sounds like. The fair reporting privilege provides, it's a conditional privilege, which means you have a defense if somebody sues you for defamation. If you make a fair and accurate conveyance of the statements that were made by somebody, and that you cite to the source, or that you present the source in a fair and accurate way. Okay? Stated simply, the fair report privilege, if applied, right? So if the judge says, yes, this is a defense that applies, it would essentially apply only to situations where the reporting of it is fair and accurate. So let's take a step back. Are you saying CNN, are you saying that you accurately and fairly published what Dershowitz said at the Senate trial? CNN says they did. CNN says, in fact, we published the entirety of the trial. We published exactly what he said. How can we be sued for our commentary and opinion on this? We'll talk about the opinion defense. But this is a beautiful analysis. Anybody that is a practitioner in defamation or in First Amendment should read this judge's ruling coming out of the Southern District in Florida. But CNN throws a defense up, right? Like, we reported it. We put all of the statement up online. We showed our viewers exactly what Dershowitz said. We're just doing commentary. And Dershowitz's response essentially was, look, you may have shown what I said earlier at some point, but what you didn't do is when you made the false statement, you purported a fact that this is what I said, and you did that after you made the quote-unquote full report of what my statements were. And you cut it off, you abridged my statement, and you tied it into your own commentary, and therefore it is not fair or accurate. And the judge agreed with Dershowitz. The judge said, CNN, listen, we don't think your report in the context in which it was conveyed was fair or accurate. Why is that a problem? It's a problem because you lose your defense at this stage in the litigation. Remember, for context, this is at the pleading stage. This is very early on in the lawsuit. Judges have to, for purposes of this kind of motion, assume what is alleged in the complaint is truthful. Okay, we're not actually going on a truth-finding mission here at this stage. So the judge's rulings here specifically only deal with the legal requirements of this defense. It's not going into a deep fact-diving exercise. There's no discovery. There's no depositions taken. There's no documents produced. It's literally testing whether certain defenses can dismiss this entire complaint at this early stage, what we call a motion to dismiss. So jumping back, the question that the court was asking is whether CNN's broadcast presented an accurate or fair abridgment of Dershowitz's comments to the Senate. Again, this happens all the time where somebody says, well, I actually said exactly what you said. I quoted you. And then the plaintiff's job is to come back and say, you did what's called an abridgment. You did, a snippet. You presented me not only in a false light, but you actually said things false, meaning you associated false statements to that report. So it is not accurate. And the judge agreed at this phase. So check that box. That defense is out the door. Fair reporting privilege has to be fair. It has to be an accurate report. You cite to the source. You convey the source in its entire context. So the judge said, CNN, sorry, no dice on that defense. What's the second defense? The second defense that CNN tried to lodge was, well, Your Honor, we're reporting an opinion versus a fact. So something super important on this, right? Something really, really important. Whenever a news agency is reporting on anything, if somebody makes a quote or a statement that is the opposite of what you're reporting, footnote, what you're saying then is false. You're reporting the opposite of what this person said, even if you're trying to say it's your opinion on it. That's not fair or accurate, and it's not an opinion. That's a fact. And the judge also agreed with that defense, right? Dershowitz specifically says, and he alleged it in his complaint, that he never said a president could commit illegal acts if he thought it would help his reelection and if his reelection was in the public interest. Period. So CNN, why didn't you say that clearly? You didn't. You said the opposite. Problem. So the fair reporting privilege doesn't apply. The fact versus opinion, right? So CNN's argument, to be more specific, is, look, this whole lawsuit should be dismissed because the statements that Dershowitz says are facts are actually not facts. There are opinions, they're rhetorical, there's hyperbole, and they actually cite some of this hyperbole and some of the rhetoric, right? So some of the things that CNN said, they said that Dershowitz's arguments during the Senate trial, impeachment trial, were un-American, that he was, quote, redefining the powers of the president, that his position, quote, blows your mind, his position meaning Dershowitz as a constitutional scholar, and that his argument is, quote, is what you hear from Stalin, what you hear from Mussolini, what you hear from authoritarians. And that, hey, those are hyperbolic statements and they're non-actionable. And Dershowitz is smart. He agreed in the responsive motion. He said, yeah, hyperbolic statements are fine. The problem is you wove your opinions with statements of fact. And now we can't separate what's opinion from fact. A listener watching you, CNN, would believe that your statements are actually reporting a fact. And he goes into detail. Specifically, the comment by CNN that Dershowitz said that a president could do anything without liability, even commit crimes. That's the specific statement that Dershowitz states CNN said. And he's correct. That is what they said. That is what CNN said. So unfortunately, as a matter of law, and this is a pure procedural issue, on a motion to dismiss, we assume what's in the complaint is true. And the court said, listen, the allegations in here are mixed questions of fact and opinion. And even your own defense presents a mixed question of fact and opinion. And when it's a mixed question of fact and opinion, you cannot rely on the opinion defense to dismiss an entire defamation lawsuit. And that's what the court said, in fact. Let me say it succinctly. A mixed expression of fact and opinion is not constitutionally protected. News folks, social media folks, make sure you remember that. That is not a pure opinion that would be entitled to a defense to defamation. So again, the court concludes that the complaint that Dershowitz filed made a plausible argument or plausible allegation, articulation of facts that show that these are statements of fact, not an opinion. So that defense was wiped out. I thought it was interesting that CNN argued, this is a really interesting argument, hey, this impeachment trial was widely covered. Like, we aired it. There's all these news stations airing it. And what's the truth? And the underlying facts are already known by the audience. Everybody knows what Dershowitz said. But the court said, listen, when you allege that you are making editorial statements and you are making opinions, we have to actually look at your statement, CNN, in the totality. We have to look at everything you said, right? We have to look at the context in which what you said as a news agency and whether these were accurate or not. We have to look at the medium by which you publish these statements. We have to look at the totality, right? And the totality, when we look at these things, according to what's alleged in the complaint, is that Dershowitz's statements are presented in a false way, meaning you're not presenting an opinion, CNN, you're presenting facts. You are saying that Dershowitz said this. You can't do that as part of your defense. The third defense, finally, was actual malice. So CNN says, hey, Dershowitz is a public figure, and as required and correctly, this is the standard, you have to allege actual malice in order to sue CNN for this. Dershowitz, you can't just sue CNN, and you can't prove that we were malicious. Once again, the court says Dershowitz has published he has argued or alleged sufficient facts to make his claim plausible, meaning if we take what he's saying is true, that in fact there is enough here to show that Dershowitz can show CNN was publishing this with malice. So let's be clear on what actual malice means in this context. Actual malice doesn't mean that you had bad intentions. It doesn't mean, that's the common law definition, right? We don't say that CNN or Dershowitz can prove actual malice because CNN hates him and they hate that he was defending Donald Trump. That's not actual malice. Actual malice means one of two things. It means either one, you're alleging that the person, the speaker of the defamatory statements, was alleging something that they knew was false. If you know something's false and you publish it as the truth, right? That's malicious, number one. The alternative is it's either you knew it was false, or number two, you were reckless in ascertaining the truth. You had reckless disregard for the truth. Normally, you would in a defamation action, you would only need to show negligence, right? You'd only need to show that you were neglectful. You had a duty to speak truthfully. You breached that duty because you spoke untruthfully. Here, it's a step up. You have to show malice, which is, like we said, either reckless disregard for the truth or actual knowledge of falsity. And CNN, apparently knew, according to Dershowitz, they knew because they had his words, they had the video, they had the transcription of what he actually said. They had the statements in their hand, as he alleges. They chose to ignore it. They chose to present him in the media on their channel as a lunatic, scholar, and that crimes are okay if you're running for office. That's essentially what Dershowitz alleged in his complaint. Again, CNN argues that, hey, we aired the entire argument earlier in the day, and so it would be impossible to show actual malice. And that, Dershowitz's statement to the Senate was ambiguous. Like, we could have interpreted it in any different way, including the interpretation that CNN alleges. And so the court talks about the standard. Again, very, very good analysis in this opinion. I think the judge did a marvelous job. But Dershowitz alleges that, no, in fact, CNN, you guys painted me as somebody who lost my mind. You painted me as somebody, that was, basically you were trying to fool your viewers because you knew for certain that I prefaced my remarks with the qualifier that a quid pro quo does not include an illegal act, meaning that unless the quo is illegal, a quid pro quo by itself is not illegal. Instead, even despite reading that, they published something totally different. So, good question here. Are news stations held at a higher standard than lower-end reporting stations, tabloids, or do they fall in the same category? All of those that you reference, tabloids, news reporting stations, believe it or not, are essentially all in the same category, meaning they get a higher standard than if you're suing a private person. And that's because if you think about it, the rationale is you have to show something more than simple negligence because we have a incentive for people to publish news as it comes out, meaning we may not have vetted the source completely, or we have a breaking story and we don't have all the facts. And so news agencies can't be sued typically for simple negligence, right? And so yes, I've seen the standard apply to blogs. I've seen it apply to tabloids. what's interesting about certain tabloids is some of them are known for hyperbole, right? And so they kind of create an additional layer for themselves if the category they're reporting on is 100% understood by the reader to be, hyperbole and extreme, like almost like reading the comics kind of a thing. You probably get what I'm saying. Anyway, good question. That's a very good question. So the judge disagreed with CNN on this. The judge said that, hey, Dershowitz specifically alleged that, quote, to falsely paint Professor Dershowitz as a constitutional scholar and intellect who had lost his mind, and that CNN knew for certain that he had prefaced his remarks with the qualifier that a quid pro quo could not include an illegal act because it aired in the entire statement earlier in the day, but the CNN knowingly omitted that portion when it played the truncated clip time and time and again. So I say this a lot to bloggers, people that are social media commentators, even if you're not a news station, okay, but you are appealing to a mass audience, or even if you don't have 1 million subscribers. If you are commenting on something and you are trying to tuck yourself into this defense, what defense? The actual malice defense, that this person is a public figure even. Similar analysis would apply there. This person's a public figure. I'm not worried. They can't prove actual malice. Well, if we can allege sufficiently facts, when we stack those facts in our complaint, which is what we do as plaintiffs' lawyers, if we have the facts, that, you know what, you had in your possession the truth, you purposely aired and played the truncated clip over and over again, and you did this knowing or with reckless disregard for the truth. So you're not out for a truth-seeking mission, you're out to fry me and my reputation. That suffices, that allegation alone suffices to show malice. And so Dershowitz won on that defense as well. And it's interesting because the commentators, and I don't want to read all the comments, but the commentators, I really think CNN should have known better. My personal opinion as being a defamation plaintiff's lawyer, I feel like they could have scrubbed this. I think they thought this is political speech. This is the, Trump's impeachment trial. We can say whatever we want. We're talking about the president, yada, yada, yada. No, you're talking about a private individual. Although, even if he is a public figure, let's just accept that Dershowitz is a public figure. You could still get hit with the defamation lawsuit. In this case, a $300 million defamation lawsuit, right? So, great analysis, 22-page opinion. I thought one thing that was interesting is that the judge did strike. They did grant CNN's request to strike from Dershowitz's complaint certain conclusions. What are those conclusions? I'm going to read them to you. However, Professor Dershowitz appears to have made one mistake. He chose to defend the President of the United States and defend the United States Constitution at a moment in time where CNN has decided that doing so is not permitted. For this, CNN set out to punish him and destroy his credibility and reputation, and unfortunately succeeded. The court struck this because they said, hey, this is scandalous, this is immaterial, it's irrelevant to the defamation claim. Don't get politics tied into this. And so I think that was a proper ruling as well. A difficult one, but a good one. So bottom line, this case really breaks down that, yes, you can be sued if you're a blogger, news agency, reporter, even if you're writing about something controversial, even if you're writing about something as significant as an impeachment of a president. You have to be honest. You have to report fairly and accurately. That's part of the integrity of reporting. Nothing makes my blood boil more than news agencies not being responsible. So this will be yet to see. We'll yet to see kind of how this case unfolds in the bigger picture. But we'll be watching this case closely and we'll report on this. Now, real quickly, I just want to talk about Dershowitz's other lawsuit pending in the same district, different judge, Florida, United States District Court, Southern District of Florida. Dershowitz v. Netflix and Leroy and Morton Productions and Joseph Berlinger. So this case, totally different from the first one. This case covers, and this lawsuit was just filed May 26, 2021. Brand new. Really, really interesting facts on this. This lawsuit's about the Netflix special, Filthy Rich. Basically, the documentary, a 4-part series on Jeffrey Epstein, the pervert who died in prison, right? So, here's a question. Would memes fall in the same category of false reporting? Good question. My personal opinion is it depends. Is the memes are generally understood to be hyperbolic. Memes are generally understood to be sometimes even satirical, and commentary and opinion. I think in the context of things, typically they should be granted some protection, right? I think memes can report or purport facts if they quote somebody, if they show a picture of somebody associated with something. Maybe you don't have a defamation claim. Maybe there's a false implication, a false light cause of action there. You still have to be careful. I think it also depends on who's making the meme. Is it a news agency? Is it some random Joe? Is it an account that is, satirical? Is it an account that purports to be independent reporting? Right? So all these things are taken into consideration. I think judges are generally more skeptical of things that are simply contained within social media, meaning the sole forum is social media, and the sole forum for communication is an account that is, supposed to have humor and satire and hyperbole. So it really depends on the circumstance, but I think it is possible. I mean, it is possible to publish something defamatory in a meme, for sure. All right, jumping back to the Netflix show. So Dershowitz basically says, listen, your Netflix special essentially says that I had sex with one of Epstein's victims a number of times. I think 6 times on a jet, on one of Epstein's jet. It is a grotesque and pretty significant allegations. There's very few allegations worse than being accused of sex assault, right? Murder's probably up there. Sex assault's probably number 2, next to financial crime. But sex assault is a big deal. Let's be clear. Being assaulted is a big deal. Coming out about your sex assault is a big deal. But we have seen in our office a large movement towards the false accusations of sex assault, where even the alleged victim recants and later says, I'm sorry, I was actually, exaggerating. This never happened. And sometimes people can be prosecuted for that. I know that in my experience in litigation, being plaintiffs' lawyers, the victims sometimes come forward and say, oh, I wasn't actually saying that I was assaulted. I was just saying that this person was a pervert. Which is still probably defamation per se. Anyway, this video, this documentary, and I think it's important that it's a documentary. It's not commentary. It's something that is purporting facts based on diligence, based on research, based on interviews, alleges that Dershowitz sexually assaulted a common victim with Jeffrey Epstein. And that it occurred either at Epstein's home or on a jet on several occasions. And this complaint, which is 39 pages and over 100 paragraphs of allegations, is very dense. It's very interesting to read. But the victim here, she essentially is appealing under the U.S. government under the Crime Victims' Rights Act, that prosecutors failed to inform her as a victim of the plea, and that she needs to have her day and really a payday for being assaulted, which I totally get, which I totally respect, and that is within the depths of the law. I think the producers of this show are a little bit under fire, because the allegation essentially is that the producers basically went out on a limb and they associated Dershowitz with the sex assault, knowing, once again, with malice, that knowing that this was false, that they had the facts in their hands. This is where it actually gets really, really interesting, because one of the victims had sued Dershowitz. And Dershowitz, I think it was one of the victims actually, came out, and after Dershowitz came out publicly and said, listen, I didn't commit these acts. I was not involved with Jeffrey Epstein. I represented him. I was his counsel. I did not assault anyone. I didn't partake in anyone. This is ridiculous. The victim came out and then sued Dershowitz, Miss Edwards, sued Dershowitz, alleging defamation, that you went publicly and you're saying you didn't assault me, which essentially is saying that I published a false statement. But you published the false statement. You're calling me a liar. I'm going to sue you. And this was in 2015. Dershowitz, that lawsuit, I think was dismissed, or at least it was, the judge in that case, again, in 2015, had some pretty harsh words for plaintiff's counsel. And Dershowitz then filed a counterclaim in that case for defamation. And this cited in this complaint for the fact that, the judge basically reprimanded the attorneys. Why is this important? It's important because apparently one of the lawyers who had filed suit against Dershowitz and is representing this victim who's portrayed in the Epstein movie, actually had talked to Dershowitz about representing him in his defense, meaning conflict of interest. And that might sound super confusing. I would urge you to read about it. The point is, the facts of this case against Netflix are super spicy and much, much more beyond what I can talk about today. But point is that Dershowitz is suing Netflix for $80 million. Netflix and the company that produced it. And there's actually a contract. So there's a breach of contract claim as well, wherein Dershowitz alleges that, look, we had an agreement, in fact, that you would not convey me my likeness in a false manner. You wouldn't disparage me. And you did exactly that by saying that I had sex with this victim on Epstein's jet, which is a serious allegation. This lawsuit was just filed. No motions to dismiss have been filed yet. But this will be extremely interesting to see how this unfolds. And, footnote this with, there are such things as false Me Too allegations. It's a slippery slope because we take allegations of sex assault very seriously. You have to investigate it. But in situations where the victim recants, or in situations where there is no evidence, or in situations where the evidence controverts this allegation, you have to question it. Dershowitz says that he produced records that show that he was not even present, and he was actually somewhere else on the dates that this alleged assault occurred. So his point is, these facts were in the hands of the production company. These facts were actually discussed directly with the production company. Notwithstanding that, they made me look like the assailant, and I'm suing you now for $80 million. This will be super interesting to see how it flushes out. I'll be curious to see if this ever gets to discovery. And if it does get into discovery, there's going to be some significant depositions and documents that should be hopefully produced that support the allegations one way or another, or support a defense, either a fair reporting defense, like we saw in the CNN case, or an opinion defense. Again, if you can show that you were not fair or accurate in your presentation of facts, if you can show that the production company had the truth in their hands, chose to ignore it, and presented a different story, then that is what we call malice. It's certainly knowledge of falsity or reckless disregard for the truth. So again, this lawsuit was just filed a few days ago. It's pending in federal court in Florida. We'll definitely keep you posted on this. And I would just end by saying this. Two real takeaways on this. Number one, media has an obligation to report fairly and accurately. They have a duty to report, sure, opinions, commentary, editorialize, fine. But you have a duty, when you are reporting facts, you got to stick to the facts. You got to distinguish facts from opinion. You got to be responsible. Number two, I would say, if you're doing a documentary, particularly on Me Too or sex assault, you have to speak truthfully. And a sort of subcategory to that is, false Me Too accusations are devastating. We have seen people completely floored, ripped apart, reputations destroyed. I have a couple of cases in front of me now where documentary evidence refutes the allegation of sex assault, of non-consensual touching. And yet, victims come forward, male or female, and say, I was assaulted. And then the facts come out, and there's some recanting. The damage is done. The damage is done. And I'm not undermining sex assault. I'll say it again. It's something that needs to be investigated. What I'm saying is, when the facts show that the accusation is false or is highly questionable, you need to convey that. You can't simply come out and say so-and-so, especially if you're reporting about it, was sexually assaulted, and I'm exposing this person. If you're a third party reporting on that, you need to have the facts. That's all for today, guys. I hope you really enjoyed it. If you have questions or comments, send us a DM or drop them in the comments. Until next time, thank you guys. Enjoy your Memorial Day.